In 1992, a third-party candidate came in to shake up the American political system because in the early 90s, Americans felt that politics had become pretty divided and was too polarizing. Ross Perot used his own money to run a populist centrist campaign which was sharply anti-NAFTA and gained 19% of the popular vote, taking voters away from both Bush and Clinton. Perot himself had never been elected to political office and had served in the Navy during the 1950s, and afterwards he founded his own electronics company. Perot was known to run the company in a militaristic fashion built on loyalty and duty. His best-known venture with the company was in 1979 when he sent a private militia into Iran in the midst of the Iranian Revolution to rescue two of his company employees who had been imprisoned. Politically, Perot was a Vietnam War hawk and had advocated for POWs and MIA, American servicemen in Vietnam. He maintained his POW activism throughout the 1980s and felt that the American government had not been doing enough for soldiers that he believed had been left behind. Perot focused his 1992 campaign on his plans to balance the federal budget, further economic nationalism, strengthen the war on drugs, and implement direct democracy. His views were described as a combination of East Texas populism with high-tech wizardry. Supporters saw him as a non-political and witty folk hero, but critics described him as authoritarian and short-tempered. Although Perot's 1992 campaign had many issues with it, which caused him to lose the election, there was no real chance of him realistically winning. However, there are some conditions which we can change to create a possible Perot victory in 1992. First, Ross Perot will not drop out of the running and come back in at the last minute to sweep 19% of the popular vote. Instead, we'll have him campaign throughout the election year. There are other campaign issues and stuff that had occurred and could have been changed to help improve Perot's chances and performances against Bush and Clinton, but I'm not going to mention every single one of them as that would take forever. But the point is, we're just going to have him campaign all throughout 1992 and give him a better chance at winning in the election. Another aspect that we can change of Perot's campaign is if his vice president, James Stockdale, who was a Medal of Honor winner and vice admiral, had been allowed to tell his story on TV during the vice presidential debate. During this debate in our timeline, Stockdale wasn't prepped and had what some might call a small gaffe in his opening statement, and the moderator never came back to him to ask him any questions about policy or to even let him tell his life story as to why he was up there and what he had to say. Additionally, the moderator was just plain old biased against Stockdale, so that's something that will also change. We can either have a different moderator, which can change the entire vice presidential debate, or have the existing moderator just be less biased and let Stockdale talk and therefore let him do well in the debates. So, now that Perot has won in the alternate 1992 election, what happens? Well, first of all, NAFTA is immediately shot down Perot, and the U.S. shifts to become more of an isolationist state following the end of the Cold War, as he wants to pay back the deficit. Other domestic policies which Perot had wanted to do were strengthen America's war on drugs, and the death of Pablo Escobar in 1993 would still happen and be one of the first victories of his administration on the war on drugs, which has helped boost his image. Perot was also in favor of gun control and maintaining an assault weapons ban in the 90s, but for the most part, Perot focuses on the economy and lowering government spending while paying back the deficit. Moving on to Perot's foreign policy, during his first term, at least, the U.S. does not intervene in any of the Yugoslavic wars. This angers a lot of people, and then he also closes bases in non-U.S. allied states, which further angers a lot of other people. As I stated before, Perot had a bit more of an isolationist view, and he was even against military action that was taken during the Gulf War, so I wouldn't expect Perot to start any new wars. This viewpoint is something that he would want to be implementing, but the world of the 1990s had a lot going on that Congress and the Senate might want the U.S. to be involved in. With Somalia, for example, Perot would likely want a full withdrawal, but it would probably go the way it did historically and be the example of why the U.S. would not want to do humanitarian interventions. Other world affairs that Perot would be challenged by would be the aftermath of the Soviet Union, the African World Wars, the civil wars in Afghanistan which brought about the Taliban, and Raul Cedras in Haiti. I think it's safe to say that Perot would not intervene in any of these conflicts, which means that there is no Operation Uphold Democracy, and Cedras stays in power in Haiti as a brutal dictator. The rest of these wars would then likely follow the same as they did in our timeline. One thing that could change, though, is how Perot's America has relations with Russia in the 1990s. The 1990s and Yeltsin's administration made Russia a complete living crap hole for about a decade. Perot, like Clinton, probably wouldn't follow through with the planned economic relief plan for Russia, which would have alleviated some of the economic disaster that was the 1990s of Russia. One thing that Perot would likely do differently from Clinton would be the 1993 Russian constitutional crisis. In our timeline, Bill Clinton told Yeltsin to do whatever he saw fit to retake parliament, and in doing so, Yeltsin kind of became a bit of an autocratic ruler, although he was technically still quote-unquote democratic. In this alternate timeline, Perot wants America to remain out of it, as technically speaking, Alexander Rutskoy and the anti-Yeltsinists were legally in the right, but nobody in Russia supported them or Yeltsin. Perot would also likely not support Yeltsin's re-election campaign. The effects of this would be completely unknown, but the First Chechen War still happens, and maybe Yeltsin isn't as bold with his political moves, or maybe he is because of oligarch support. But due to not being best friends with Ross Perot, he may have to resign earlier than he did in 1999 in our timeline. Back to the domestic front, Perot created the Reform Party in 1994 in our timeline, and he would likely need to do the same thing in this alternate timeline to get members of Congress elected to support his platform, as the two existing political parties would be hostile to Perot's agenda since he's an independent. Perot would want to remain independent throughout his administration and encourage people to run on his platform, but he really needs a party if he wants to get legislation passed. The 1996 election is between Ross Perot, Bill Bradley, and Bob Dole. Depending on how Perot's first term goes, the Republicans and Democrats might want to appeal to a more centrist base, as Perot had won the 1992 election by doing so. However, there are also people in both parties who would highly politicize everything, as they had done in the 90s in our timeline. The economy was good in the 90s, so the average American voter would likely vote for Perot despite Congress going crazy that an independent was elected and a third party was created. It's possible that there is some depolarization of Democrats and Republicans to maintain seats against the Reform Party, which only wins a few throughout Perot's presidency. Both parties could emphasize the areas where they agree on with Perot in order to pass legislature, but come on, this is post-Cold War American politics, and everyone will likely focus on what's wrong with all of the other parties. It's unlikely that the Reform Party remains a large player for after the 2000 election, but we do see a Trump versus Gore versus Bush in 2000. The Reform Party probably dissolves as a major player by 2004 if Trump isn't elected in the year 2000. This three-way election could go in any direction, and the result would determine the future of the Reform Party. If Trump won in 2000, then he could win again in 2004 against John McCain and John Kerry, but 2008 would definitely remove the Reform Party from any future elections as a main player due to the alternate recession. Assuming Trump won in 2000, his cabinet would attempt to bring Republicans and Democrats together again, especially with the start of the War on Terror. It's possible that Jesse Ventura is nominated by the Reform Party in 2008 against Rudy Giuliani and Barack Obama. I could go into the details of this alternate 2000s, assuming Perot had run the U.S. in the 1990s and how Trump's presidency in the 2000s would be, but there's a lot of conditions that have been changed which could drastically shift the world's 2000s and 2010s, and Perot's administration running things with Russia, China, and the rest of the world would completely throw this scenario to be completely unknown. But what do you think would have happened if Ross Perot had won the 1992 election? How do you think it would have happened, and what do you think the results would have been? Do you have any other alternate presidencies that you would like for me to cover? Feel free to let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.